I'm Juliana Zamit from Malta Today, and today we are here with Alva Smith, who is an Irish academic, feminist, and LGBTQ activist. She was also the co-director of the campaign Together for Yes, where they legalized access to abortion in Ireland in 2018. What inspired you to get involved in abortion rights movements?
Oh, well, I became involved in pro-choice politics a very long time ago, right at the beginning. I suppose it was the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s, in that first wave of the women's liberation movement. And I became involved quite simply because at that point, for women in Ireland, we didn't have access to contraception. Contraception was illegal, and we absolutely did not have access to abortion. What you had to do was to travel over to Britain, and while that's a good deal easier now because you can fly across quite easily, there's Ryanair and I don't know what not. In those days, you had to take a ferry, but also because fundamentally, when I became involved in feminism and the women's movement in the 1970s, this was very much about saying that as women, we need to be agents and decision makers in our own lives, that what happens to me as a woman is something that I should fully participate in and have my own agency in actually deciding. And of course, in relation to reproductive rights, as women, we simply didn't have any rights whatsoever. And basically, you were just expected to get pregnant and have children time after time after time. And my generation of women, particularly middle class women in Ireland and elsewhere around the world, were having access to more education and understanding that the world had horizons that would open up to us and that we wanted smaller families. So I, for example, was one of 6 children, and while, I quite enjoyed being in a relatively large family, I didn't want that many children myself.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on the current state of reproductive rights in Malta?
Well, it's very, very similar to the situation that we had in Ireland until 2018 when we gained access to abortion by making it illegal. What happened for us was that we had a constitution and it was amended in 1983 to put a ban against abortion into the constitution. Yes. So what we were doing in 2018 was removing that ban. So I'm aware that the situation is a little bit different in Malta in that abortion is regulated by legislation, but that legislation is incredibly severe, despite the fact that a young woman who was visiting the island not very long ago had to be airlifted out to have an abortion elsewhere. And, that certainly for me, and I think actually for many people here in Malta, but also right across Europe and elsewhere, is really quite profoundly shocking because, Malta is a progressive place, it's a democracy, you're very open to the world, it's, I should say, a very beautiful place as well, but it is also, a very strong economy, very open economy, and you have very good laws relating to LGBTIQ people, and yet when it comes to women, I would have to say that Malta, like Ireland used to be, is way back in the dark ages. And I think I can say that because I grew up and I lived and I fought in a country where it was exactly the same. And I know the distress and the suffering and the needless worrying and anxiety that causes girls and women and anybody who can get pregnant. And I think that that's very, 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 very wrong. I think we should, all of us, have autonomy when it comes to our bodies. And for women and people who can get pregnant, that means the right to make our own decisions about a reproduction.
Do you not feel legalizing abortion is an almost impossible task in a close-knit Christian community that we find in Malta?
Well, yeah, I grew up in a country which was at that time certainly 93% Catholic. When we had our referendum in 2018, I think officially it was, I don't know, 83% Catholic, and yet we won our referendum by 66% to, 33 whatever percent, which indicates that I think Catholics in Ireland make a distinction between the laws of the state and their own conscience and the decisions that they make as Catholics. And I think that that's the way it should be in a modern state, because I'm assuming, I don't know all that much, but I'm assuming that there are people who live in Malta who are not necessarily Catholic, but that in any case, I think contemporary Catholicism is so much more about understanding that we have our beliefs, we have our faith, we have our way of practicing our religion, but we also have our morality and our ethics ourselves personally, and we're able to make that distinction. So, I would say that that's very important equally in Malta. And one of the things that I found most striking when I was, out there actually campaigning for the right to abortion, that I obviously met, I would say to people, look, I'm in favor of giving women the right to make their own choice. And somebody would say to me, well, I don't approve of abortion, I don't like it, I don't want it, but who am I to stop another person making their decision and their choice?
Yes.
And it's, I think, a very sensible way of thinking about it. What you're saying is that people need the freedom to make that choice for themselves and not be dictated to by the state. Because ultimately that means that the state, if you leave it like that the state is some kind of major authoritarian figure. And I don't think that's what contemporary democratic states should do.
Can you discuss any specific strategies that were effective in making abortion legal in Ireland that could be applied towards making abortion legal in Malta?
Well, I think what struck me, and it strikes me everywhere where we have problems, is that what makes people really think about the impact of prohibiting abortion or of limiting it to simply life-saving situations is when they understand how difficult this makes life for girls and for women. And in the case of Malta, because it's an island like Ireland, women so often have to travel for abortion elsewhere, and that's very costly. It's very difficult. You may have 2 or 3 children anyway. You have a job. You can't just take off. You don't have the money. All of these questions are really very, very important, and I think people are very attentive to that. People used to say to me, "Oh, I never thought about that. I never thought about how difficult that is." And just seeing the distress and the suffering, women standing up or just talking about their own situations. And we had a great outpouring, I think, in Ireland of women saying, I had an abortion 30 years ago, I never talked about it before, that silence has been there like a weight on my heart, and it is now a relief to be able to say that I had that and to be able to tell my children that I had that, because there has been so much stigma, so much silencing of the very real experiences that women have in our everyday lives. Banning abortion doesn't stop it. It just means that women are under incredible pressure and stress and strain.
It makes it more dangerous.
It makes it much more dangerous. Women can get abortion pills online. Medical abortion is now, very widespread. But women also, and while medical abortion is really safe, it's very important for women, and I'm thinking maybe of quite young women, to know that it's safe to go to their doctor or it's safe to go to their local hospital in the event of there being any kind of problem or difficulty. So one of the ways in which we spoke to people in Ireland about abortion was that this is fundamentally about women's health. It's about women's health care. It's about being able to care for ourselves in the ways that are best for us, and it's about ensuring that we're actually safe. It's extraordinary, really, that I suppose male-led governments, not just in Malta, but elsewhere in the world as well, have this notion that if you say no women will have abortions, that somehow it stops. But of course it doesn't stop. So what it actually does is it piles up problems and difficulties and hypocrisy and lies, because I won't speak for Malta, but I can tell you that in Ireland, Irish people say, oh, no, we don't have abortion in this country. No, but we had it. Irish women being exported at their own expense over to Britain for abortions and then coming back to Ireland, so that it never happened on the sacred soil of Ireland. But that didn't mean that those abortions weren't happening. They were just happening somewhere else.
Are there any particular legislative changes that you hope to see implemented in Malta regarding reproductive rights?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that the legislation you have in place now be expanded to enable women to have abortion on request up to, a certain number of weeks. I believe myself that abortion should be available up to viability. We have always said in medical circles in Ireland that abortion should always be as early as possible and as late as necessary, because there are, of course, situations where women require abortion in cases of their own health, or because there is some kind of anomaly, a fetal anomaly that needs to be dealt with quite later on.
Mm-hmm.
But that fundamental change needs to be made, and it is never enough just to change the law. You also have to make sure that women have real access to medical and health care, so that there is appropriate hospital care where that's going to be required, and appropriate primary medical care from general practitioners, doctors in communities, so that women can actually take abortion pills safely. And we have found that works really well in Ireland. We were, I think, very fortunate that abortion is free for anybody who requires it. Any pregnant person, a woman who requires abortion, can have an abortion free. It's available on request up to 12 weeks. And after that, it's much more limited. It's for health reasons. In fact, 12 weeks isn't quite enough time. It should, to ensure a relatively early abortion, it needs to be expanded further. And the second dimension then is to make sure that hospitals are appropriately equipped for all of the testing and the medical access, and that there is proper training for doctors. Because I think at present, I imagine it's the same in Malta as it was in Ireland, there wasn't very much, if any, training for medical students. So of course you need to have that. And there's a kind of a mindset change that obviously has to take place. And in Ireland that's still happening, where medical professionals, not just doctors, nursing staff, all medical professionals have to understand that reproductive rights is a very central part of a woman's health and of her life, and that includes the right to abortion. It includes the need for care in circumstances where a woman wants to terminate a pregnancy.
So, given your experience in Ireland, do you see the abortion status quo in Malta changing over the next decade?
Well, we're different places, Ireland and Malta, but what I do know is that Maltese women and many men that I know are absolutely determined to bring about this legislative change, and that given that Malta is part of the European Union, I think that the European Union also has a role to play in this. I would say it's not for me to tell any other country what to do, but it's very clear that you have younger generations coming up who are saying, look, whether I approve of abortion or not, that's not the question. It should be available. A woman
Exactly.
should be able to make a choice about her own body. So I know that the collectives who are fighting for that here in Malta say my voice, my choice, and it's quite astonishing to me that within the European Union that Malta is such an outlier. And it's astonishing because I grew up, you know, over the past decade and more, thinking of Malta as being progressive because of your legislation in relation to lesbian and gay people. And then I discovered that, you know, abortion is still prohibited. And that really astonishes me. Nobody is saying, making a law to say, for example, when lesbian and gay marriage was introduced, the government didn't say every lesbian and every gay person in Malta must now get married. No, it's a choice. And similarly with abortion, it's not about saying every woman in Malta has to even approve of abortion. It's about saying, look, this is a choice that women can make. And I cannot see what is actually preventing this in this very contemporary, very open country. I can't understand that. I couldn't understand it in Ireland, and I didn't like it in Ireland. And if I were a Maltese woman, I certainly wouldn't like it here either. I'm not, but I wouldn't like it.
And how did activism contribute to the success of abortion laws in Ireland? And what can Maltese activists learn from this?
Well, I think activism is very important in a democratic state. When you want to change something, you actually have to actively say to your political representatives in your parliament, this is what we want, this is what we need, these are the reasons why, this is the argument, you represent us, therefore we want you to listen to what we need. And I think that that is exactly the process which is going on now. It's also really important to talk with people around the country to say why this is necessary, why it's important, why it has to change. So, of course, activism is very important, and activism happens, as you know, in many different ways. It happens on the street. We had a wonderful rally here in Malta on Saturday, and I think it's really important to show people that you care, that this really matters, that you're fighting for women's freedom. But it's also very important online through social media. It's also very important to be active in relation to the people who have power in a country. So, for example, in Ireland, we lobbied our politicians, we lobbied other people with influence, we wrote endless papers and leaflets and so on and so forth. And of course, we also worked very extensively with international institutions, including the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the European Union, and so on, all of whom have a role to play in evaluating the healthcare situation of women in given countries, and who, generally speaking, UN, Council of Europe, and so on, were very supportive of our campaigns in Ireland, because that is very much about opening up human rights. And I would certainly argue that the right to abortion is a human right.